It's 1982, and a young man from the Greater Vancouver area by the name of Tim Stevenson feels the call of the Spirit to be ordained as a minister for the United Church of Canada, and guess what? He is gay. We can't have a gay minister in our church? The whole denomination across the country freaks out, and a committee is assembled to try and figure out what to do with his application. Another young man by the name of Gary Patterson is asked to sit on that committee. And guess what? Yeah, he too is gay. He is not openly gay because it's 1982 and he has already been ordained as a minister. He's a practicing minister in the United Church. But he searches his soul, he prays about it, and he makes the tough call. He outs himself to the committee. And so do 15 others from the Greater Vancouver area who had also been closeted church members, or even in some cases church ministers. 15 of them. Who knew there were even that many gay people? The debates are raging across Canada and all throughout the 1980s. But finally, in 1988, a decision is going to be made. And for the region of British Columbia, this happens right here, behind these blue tarps and scaffolding at St. Andrew's Wesley United Church. But over 5 days of debate, something really unexpected starts to unfold, because delegates begin meeting actual gay people, like Tim and Gary. And it turns out they are not monsters. In fact, they're really lovely men. One delegate described his experience of standing right in front of the information table for the Community for Concern, as they called themselves, and boy, were they ever concerned. They're all sitting at their table hollering and shouting and just red in the face and angry, all screwed up. And they are sitting right across from the pro-gay table. And everyone here is praying and crying and hugging, and the difference in temperament is pretty noticeable. And so this delegate has a little moment. He asks himself, where would Jesus be? So my name is Glenn Tkach. I am the creator of the Really Gay History Tour with Forbidden Vancouver Walking Tours. I grew up in a small town south of Edmonton called Wetaskiwin. My family was quite religious in the sense that there was a sort of strict moral code. We went to a United Church, and so that was kind of my first exposure to Christianity. I remember this struggle going on about gay ministers in the church. I was just really young growing up in the 80s. This was the first time that I heard the word gay mentioned, and in my family, in my household, this was spoken about, of course, in very disparaging terms. As far as I had been told or taught, a gay person was a pervert, someone who rebelled against God, someone who was going out of their way to find perverted ways to just be depraved, someone who was going out of their way to be sinful. That's what I thought a gay person was. And that wasn't me. I just liked the company of men. It's this whole layered thing, I guess, about my relationship with religion and my relationship with my own sexuality and how those things are intertwined. I think in some ways creating this tour, I mean, it's not about me, it's about the story of the queer community here and the story of queer history, but it really was personal for me. I think in some ways it was an act of self-discovery. It was a way for me to figure out who I am in the context of the history that I belong to. It's not just that it's a story that I didn't know, it's a story that nobody knows. It's a story that's buried. I didn't set out in a kind of evangelistic way to think, okay, I'm gonna spread the message of queer acceptance. That's not really what it's about for me, but I hope it does. I mean, I think bringing queer history out into the light of day will have that positive effect. It will have those reverberating effects. Now we can walk the streets openly with me dressed in pink, and we can just flamboyantly talk about queer history out in the open, and no one will give it a second glance. So this is how far we've come in such a short time. So I think it's important to understand, not just in an abstract way that sacrifices were made, but to understand what those sacrifices were and who made them. They always say, I know it's a cliche, but if you don't know history, then you're doomed to repeat it. Understanding in a specific and granular way what happened here, what happened in this city to give us the freedoms that we have, is an important part of being able to properly protect and also celebrate those freedoms. The Davie Street Village is now probably one of the most vibrant queer villages in all of North America. But in the 1970s and early 1980s, would you believe that the West End of Vancouver was actually the sex trade capital of Canada? And back then, if you were looking for the ladies, you could cruise pretty much anywhere all over the West End. If you were looking for boys, then you could cruise specifically on Pendrell Street. If you were looking for drag queens or transgender sex workers, then you could cruise right here where I am standing now. A lot of them had started out on Pendrell Street, working as if they were boys, and found that they could double their money, just like that, by revealing themselves to be girls. And the sex workers of Davie Street and of the West End were a real community. But in the end, it was not the pimps or the cops or the bad dates who were the greatest threat to this community. In the end, it was, of all things, gay liberation. Queer community in the early 1980s, in particular gay men, were having a few troubles of their own. And in order to survive in extremely hostile society, gay men were finding that they had to stick together. They had to hold on to one another, and they had to form a community. And where are they going to form this community? Well, right here, right between the gay bar scene on Granville Street and the age-old cruising grounds of Stanley Park, was this conveniently located neighborhood with affordable one-bedroom apartments. And so pretty soon, gay bars started to follow suit, and they started opening up on Davie Street, and not just bars. There were diners and coffee shops with an open gay presence. This was totally different than the closeted bar scene on Granville Street. This was the beginnings of a community, of a village. But how are they going to form a respectable community and be taken seriously in the middle of this seedy red light district? And so many people within the community began to advocate for the removal of the sex workers from the West End. Of course, the sex workers and their allies saw it a little bit differently. And as far as they were concerned, it was their presence here, especially the trans and male sex workers, who had helped to establish a queer identity here to begin with. They were the trailblazers. The sex workers had to go, and so just like that, poof, in 1983, injunction was granted, allowing police officers to bully the sex workers out of this community on threat of arrest, and then they were just swept away. It turns out that no other community wanted them either. You'll never guess where they ended up. The downtown east side, along with the rest of the city's unwanted. And so behind the rainbow flags and the colorful crosswalks of the Davie Street Village is a pretty dark story about a community that was unfairly pitted against itself in a sort of gladiator fight to the death. And in order for one part of this community to survive and to thrive in the way that it has, the other part had to be swept away and ultimately sacrificed. We are finally now at a moment in queer history where the trans community is starting to gain some of the rights and some of the recognition that they have so bravely and heroically fought for the rest of us. And so as we get to enjoy the freedom and the openness that the Davie Street Village represents, let's not forget that it was built upon the sacrifice of many individuals within the trans community.